Hi everyone, and welcome to the final product of the semi-realistic Jowwi sculpture. I've decided to show off the final thing in a separate video since this has by far been my longest sculpt yet, and I didn't really want to make a small little video with just a little bit of progress in it and then just show the final thing. I think it'll be nice, since it's been a 4-part series, 5 including this one, I think it'll be nicer just to have this final thing on its own independently. That way if you want to see the entire process you can, if you want to skip to the end, you have this video. Now this Jowwi, like I said, it's taken me a very long time. I purposefully went for semi-realistic because after all it is a fictional creature and I am still learning ZBrush, I'm still learning realism, 3D sculpting, all these kind of things, textures, anatomy, so and so on. Therefore I think it's semi-realistic, that way I can still retain some of the whole fictional aspect, it can still be like a little bit cartoonish or a little bit exaggerated here and there, but of course still, you know, having in the name the general goal of this, which was to have something that was a little bit more on the kind of ish realism side. And overall I've definitely learned a lot in the process of making this, more practice than anything else, a lot of practice and a lot of experience, which is always incredibly valuable. But of course a couple of other things, such as little techniques for how to, you know, really bring out the scales, to have a nice sort of rich multitude of colours, such as the little things like having the more human eyes, as I will demonstrate to you guys now. When I was originally drawing this Jowwi, I'd actually started with a very different set of eyes for this. After looking at various images of dinosaurs and various reptiles, I tried to go for a, you know, far more reptilian look, and as much as I liked it, I kind of liked the way it was going, in the end it just didn't feel Jowwi enough to me. Granted, this is meant to be a very different style altogether, it still felt just a little bit off. Whereas the very simple thing of adding the more human eyes in, yes, technically it's very unrealistic for this kind of creature, it really does tie together just that little bit of uniqueness, character, and made it significantly more familiar. Another major part about the sculpture is that this was my first time really going nuts in terms of, you know, lack of symmetry, in terms of posture and posing, and I did these things a little bit backwards compared to what I normally do. I've tried doing pose sculptures in the past and I find it to be a massive struggle, hence, you know, experience and practice being so valuable. Usually whenever I try to pose a model, I'll do the entirety of the model up to about 90% completed and then try posing it from there, but what I've often experienced a lot of, you know, meshes kind of distorting, a lot of really horrible stretch marks and that kind of stuff. But so for this one, I decided to try and pose it significantly earlier on. It had its pros and cons, it definitely had its pros and cons. On the one hand, it meant I could consistently and reliably output the same amount of detail, the same amount of sculpting, patterns, colours, textures, so on and so forth throughout the entire thing, not leaving a single gap or area untouched. But it also meant that certain things such as patterns, such as the stripes, it was very hard to try and mimic them on both sides. And while I certainly feel much more confident having, you know, kind of stock poses where it's just a very simple symmetrical form, well I do much prefer those kind of things as they're more comfortable for me and I can do a lot more and, you know, I can tweak things here and there and my limits are significantly increased. I do feel like having the posture here is a little bit more character centered, it feels to me like quite a bit more unique, especially as it is meant to be on the semi-realistic side. When it came to references, so like I said, this is of course a fictional creature. Therefore, I kind of had to splice together a couple of different designs and different references. It is of course based on a dinosaur, with the major part being velociraptors, dromaeosaurs in general. The frills are based on a bit of a combination between, you know, between Jurassic Park dilophosaurs, but also frilled lizards and other such existing reptiles nowadays. I decided for the upper frill to be very similar to that of a Jurassic Park dilophosaur. That way, one, because they're alike, but also two, that way it's a bit more familiar and it doesn't look quite as out of place. However, because the Jowwi has two sets of frills, the upper and the lower, it meant that for the lower ones I had to kind of be a little bit more experimental, since I didn't want to have just the same form twice. I wanted them to be independent and very unique of each other. Therefore, for the second ones, I tried to go for a bit of a more droopy kind of thing going on. When it came to other features such as the eyes I really looked into kind of smaller raptors and dromaeosaurs, ones like Troodons or Compies or whatever, basically any reference I could find that depicted a raptor with very large eyes. That way I could basically have the about ish the right size eyes for the Jowwi. They probably should be a lot larger if it's going to be a Jowwi. But that way, a couple little things such as their position in the skull, how recessed they are, the eyebrows, the ridges and all that kind of stuff. That way, you know, again, it's a little bit more familiar. For other things such as the body, so when it comes to the Jowwis, they normally have like a very puffy chest and the hips are very small. But I kind of went backwards on this one because as much as I enjoy that kind of posture and that will always be the core anatomy for the Jowwi, I figured for this more realistic thing, again, the entire point of realism is familiarity. I gotta have things be familiar for it to really work, especially with my lack of experience. Therefore, I decided to once again go for a very typical dromaeosaur, with a couple of twists of course. Such as the feet are, you know, very typical reptile feet. I purposefully did not include the toe claw that raptors are very well known for because after all the Jowwi simply does not have that. When it comes to the arms, I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for this, but it is very, very simple. I've always depicted and imagined the Jowwis of having maneuverable wrists comparable to that of a human. If you get your hand down, you know, flex your wrist all around, trying to do that pose that the Jowwi there currently has, it's a little bit rigid, sure, but it's quite easy to do. And that's what I imagined with this. I know a lot of people give a lot of flack in terms of, you know, broken wrists and all that kind of stuff, but with this being a fictional dinosaur, I really just wanted to have my own freedom. You know, I gotta draw the line in some places, and for me, if I want to have the wrists like this, I simply will. In the end, it is a familiar design, and it stays true to the actual Jowwi design, therefore I am happy and satisfied with how it came out. Additionally, continuing on from realism and, you know, anatomical things, a couple of other things as well, such as the tail, I feel like is probably a little bit too narrow, maybe a bit too flexible, and especially when you look at it from this direction, maybe a bit too thin. But when it came to the Jowwi, like another large thing about it is the legs are meant to be very, very large. That way it could counterbalance the entirety of the weight, especially the very, very front-heavy body. Certain features, such as the larger snout and the large horns, are definitely going to weigh it down. Therefore, the tail, I'd probably actually do a little bit bigger on this, looking back on it now. I tend to have the Jowwis having a very, very large tail, with the sails on the end being exceptionally large. Very dramatic, of course, very over the top, but that is just the design. Other features, such as the sail here, I was very torn about this, and in my opinion, as much as I really, really tried with this model and I really tried to have things as close to perfection in terms of my own satisfaction as I could, a couple of things such as the sail and the tail frill, I'm not entirely satisfied with, and I think that just really comes down to practice. More experimenting, I just got to get more used to things, trying out these kind of designs. I've always kind of struggled with sails in particular, and while I think it does work for this model, I do also think it holds it back slightly, and in the end it's one of them things, it just comes down to more practice. Which is why I do these things, that way I can learn. Now when it came to the colours, I actually had a very, very fun time with the colours, and I think this is something that probably quite a few people could learn from. So this is the overall completed model in terms of materials, colours and such, but when it came to actually, you know, doing the colours, what I ended up doing was I changed my material to a very flat material such as chalk. That way all the different scales, all the bump mapping, all of the ridges and such here and there, they're much more flatter and the textures are not quite as overpowered by shadows. And what this means is that everywhere that you look at, you always see some variety of colour. A lot of these colours and details may be hidden away when the shadows are taken into account, but for this, as I said, I am very satisfied with how it came out. Everywhere that you look at the body is either going to be, you know, a bit of a wrinkle here, a bit of a splotcher there. There's always going to be constant highlights and lowlights regardless of shading, and I think it works out quite nicely. Another example is if I use the flat colour material, and again you can see here, there's just constant, consistent colours here and there. I can see that in a couple of places, such as just here around the back of the jawline, it does get a little bit bare, but for the most part I do really like this technique, and it's something I'll be using significantly more often. When I return it back to the original material I was happy with, like I said, a lot of it may be hidden away, but I feel like it just adds that little bit more, and it really, really prevents, you know, any empty areas, any just random places that are just like a block colour, and in particular does not rely on the shadows and shading or the ridges and sculptures to make up for it. And finally, as a little personal note here, when it came to the necklace, admittedly I forgot about it, I don't know why I keep forgetting about the Jowwi necklace, but when it came to this one, originally I was thinking of doing the very typical thing that I always do, and that's having a leather strap with a gem at the bottom. But I figured, you know, for what is basically looking like an extraordinarily prehistoric creature, having a nice finely crafted leather neck wouldn't really make any sense. I almost went for a very different design entirely, a more tribal kind of thing. Imagine a collar made out of bones and such, but once again I kind of realised that's just a little bit too advanced for what again is a very, very primitive looking creature. Now arguably the Celtic Knot is again also much more advanced for it, especially, you know, the lack of thumbs. But I felt like it was just a nice overall balance. I felt like it'd be nice to include the necklace, that way again it's just a little bit more familiar to that of a Jowwi. It really stays true to the general design, but it's not overly complicated. It's easily recognisable, you can quite clearly tell it's a necklace with a blue gem, as simple as that, and in the end that's really all that I wanted for it. And in the end, that is the final outcome of the semi-realistic Jowwi. As I said, I've learnt a lot along the process, really trying to keep a balance between my own desires and wishes, and of course trying to make it familiar, trying to make it realistic, all that kind of things, and overall I felt like I've hit a pretty happy medium. I feel like this is a tremendous improvement from my previous, you know, semi-realistic kind of models, or just, you know, trying to touch into realism. And while I do have a long way to go before I can reach true realism in 3D, I am very happy with the process so far, with the journey, and of course just constantly getting practice. And of course, the absolute most key and important thing being, I had a lot of fun. This is a very personal project. It wasn't really for anyone other than just myself, therefore, as well as a couple of biased features here and there. And I especially wanted to see what it is I could really do as I push myself forward. But as always, fun is the most important part when it comes to these kind of things, especially when learning, and I had a lot of it. Thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you found the thoughts and feedback quite interesting. Let me know what you think, and as always, I'll catch you all next time. Have a wonderful day.